Sunday marked the 6th month since President Park Geun-hye took office, and analysts are taking the opportunity to examine what her administration has accomplished and where it's fallen short.
And we will do the same with an in-depth look at President Park's performance over the past 6 months. For that, we now connect live to our presidential office correspondent Eoh Jin-joo at the Arirang News Center. So, Jin-joo, what do the people here in Korea think about the president's first 6 months in office?
Well, Daniel, more than half of the people here in the nation think President Park is doing a good job. If we look at this graph, it shows that President Park's approval rating has steadily increased since her inauguration in February. She was what experts call a slow starter. Her approval rating in early April was at 41%, but this figure jumped to 54% in a survey announced in the third week of August. Now, this figure, 54, is almost double that of former presidents Roh Moo-hyun and Lee Myung-bak's at the 6-month mark. Their approval ratings at around that time stood at 29% and 24% respectively, a big drop from the approval ratings they received in their first to second months in office. In President Roh's case, the low marks were the result of a conflict with the conservative camp, and in the case of the Lee administration, it was a controversial decision to resume U.S. beef imports despite public concern over mad cow disease.
So, Jin-joo, what are some of President Park's policies that are being well received by the public and experts?
Well, looking at the change in her approval rating, we can see what President Park did well or did not do well. Her failed appointments and nominations of high-ranking officials, for example, starting with her nomination of Kim Yong-jun for Prime Minister, were what dragged down her approval rating to its lowest point at 41% in April. But the figure started to pick up around May, ironically due to North Korea's continued threats. Let's take a further look. Even after the North unilaterally shut down the inter-Korean Kaesong industrial complex in April, President Park wasn't swayed by Pyongyang's threats and consistently upheld her North Korea policy, making it clear that there will be no compromises made on such provocative behavior. Her strategy eventually drew the North back to the negotiating table, which resulted in a joint agreement between the two Koreas, stating there will be no further halts at the business park and the two will work towards globalization of the complex.
저는 이번 합의를 계기로 과거 남북 관계의 잘못된 관행을 바로잡고 상생의 새로운 남북 관계가 시작되기를 바람하지 않습니다.
President Park also proved her strength in diplomacy. Her approval rating hit its highest point at 63% after she made visits to the U.S. in early May and China in late June. During the bilateral summits with U.S. President Barack Obama and Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Park was able to secure full support from both countries on her push for a trust-building process with North Korea.
And we're determined to be fully prepared for any challenge or threat to our security, and obviously that includes the threat from North Korea.
The situation on the Korean Peninsula is heading in a positive direction, and we hope that related countries can work together to quickly resume the six-party talks.
In particular, Presidents Park and See agreed that North Korea's nuclear program is unacceptable under any circumstances. Experts say that although it might be too early to talk about a denuclearized peninsula, she made a meaningful first step towards her trust-building process with the North. People also gave her high grades for pushing to root out corruption, including the administration's hunt for ex-President Chun Doo-hwan's illegal assets, which he owes to state.
전직 대통령의 그 추징금 문제도 과거 10년 이상 쌓여온 일인데 역대 정부에서 해결을 못하고 이제서야 새 정부가 의지를 갖고 해결을 하려고 하고 있습니다.
President Park has put forth the goal of, quote, normalizing abnormal practices and is strongly pushing ahead with investigation into corruption scandals in the nuclear power plant sector and audit results of the Four Rivers Restoration Project.
So it looks like our president is getting maybe 1.5 thumbs up at the moment. But in what areas does President Park need to improve?
Going back to the graph again, the main reason in the drop of her approval rating from nearly 60% to 54% earlier in August was the tax code overhaul announced on the 8th. This resulted in strong backlash from the opposition party and much of the public as the proposal increased taxation on some 4.3 million salaried employees with an annual income of more than $31,000, many of them falling into the middle class bracket. The Finance Ministry quickly put forth the revised version of the tax code proposal, but many experts criticized President Park's economic team for being ignorant about what can actually help the people's livelihoods. There's also concern that the Finance Ministry and the Deputy Prime Minister are not fulfilling their roles as an economic control tower, but relying on the presidential office of Cheongwade instead. Other than that, a lack of communication with the opposition party and the public still remains an area in which President Park needs to improve. Cheongwade explained that if the first 6 months were a period for setting up the blueprint for the Park administration, it says it will now speed up its efforts to push ahead with actual measures to revitalize the economy and create more jobs, as well as carrying out sales diplomacy with other countries.
Well, thanks for that report, Jin-joo.
That was our presidential correspondent, Eoh Jin-joo, reporting live from the News Center on the first 6 months of the Park Geun-hye administration.